Welcome back to the Sixth Gear Garage. Today, I'm going to show how to wet sand and polish to turn this old, crusty, neglected aluminum wheel into this fully polished aluminum wheel, painted insets inside and outside the barrel as well. And I'm doing this right here in my garage without any special tools or machinery. The polishing process is mostly wet sanding, and here is everything I'll be using. Starting with some 320 grit, then I'll move on to the 400 grit, then 600 grit, then I've got some 800 grit, and some 1000 grit, and some 1500 grit, and finally some 2000 grit. So the lower the grit, the more coarse and aggressive it is. Then as I move up, the scratches get finer, and these 2000 grit scratches are so fine that I can remove them with this Mother's polish. I did a whole test of different aluminum polishes in a previous video that I'll link in the description, and Mother's had great results. So here's my wheel. You can see it's bare aluminum. It's been used in Ohio winters as well as off-road. Completely neglected. It has a little bit of curb rash, which I'm not too concerned about, but I am going to take down these high areas. And check out the paint here on these inset areas. The salt has corroded the aluminum under the paint, so it's just flaking off now. Same with all of this under the center cap. I chose the worst wheels I have for this project, but it'll be a great before and after. This is from a wheel weight at some time in the past, where the road salt was trapped against the bare aluminum. The back side of the wheel isn't any better. The original paint is just flaking off because of all the corrosion on the surface of the aluminum. So I'll need to remove all this and repaint as well. I told you, I picked a rough one for this project. So you're seeing a worst case scenario transformation here. I like a good challenge. The center cap is pretty bad as well. Corrosion, and this is gonna have to come off. I'll find some replacement stickers, but it's really rough and stained. I don't even know how it got like this. So I'll restore the center cap last. The first thing to do is remove this valve stem. Just get a razor blade and cut the rubber plug off from the back. And it's not cutting through. Oh, the metal goes all the way through on this one. We'll try this instead. A lot of these are just rubber, and you can cut the back right off and pull the rest through. But this one is actually well made. There we go. Cut this last little bit off. Oh, look. It's actually brass. That's gotta be old. And get these lead weights out of the way. There are special tools to remove these weights. I'll put a link down in the description. This may not be the right tool for the job, but I'm making it work. That's basically my slogan. Sixth Gear Garage. Work with what you got. I don't know what else I'd use these for. If you know what these are supposed to be used for, let me know in the comments. Next, I gave the wheel a good scrubbing, inside and out, to remove all dirt, salt, and grease. There was some kind of yellow goo on the barrel of the wheel. Maybe the previous owner used tire slime at one point? Look at all this gunk on the inside edge of the rim here. I'm guessing that might be a tire sealant, which was probably used because the salt had corroded the aluminum all the way to the bead where the tire seals. It's all the way around. I've got a heavy scuff pad here, and I'm just giving this area a good scrub down. Oh, that's already getting better. I'll put a link to one of these in the description. You could also use a brass wire brush attachment on a drill.
That would be a lot faster. But I said I'm doing this by hand. So if you don't have any power tools or you're Amish, then this is the way. Next, I use the scuff pad on the outer barrel of the wheel to scrub off all the residue left over from the tire sealant. The soapy water I'm spraying is just dish soap mixed with water. And then I scrubbed the inside of the wheel and took it outside for another rinse. Now I'm just getting into all the details with this little wire brush. I know it's a lot of cleaning, but it's important on a set of neglected wheels. I mean, you could just have them sandblasted, but I'm doing this whole project from start to finish right here in my garage. Because I'm going to be painting the backside of the wheel like it was from the factory, this is an important step, removing all these years of dirt. And that is going to help the primer and paint bond and stick much better. These gouges are from a tire machine and they're kind of deep, but they also stick up a lot and they're sharp. So I'm going to file them down flush with this file. But this isn't a regular flat file. I need to use a curved file because the wheel is curved. I'll put a link to one of these in the description in case you have these marks on the inside of your wheel. And these are every 90 degrees from the machine. These are even sharper. That's better. All this flaking and peeling paint on the inset areas of the spokes, I'm scraping off what I can because that means I don't have to sand through the paint. Because even though the aluminum is bare, I still have to sand it to remove all the corrosion, so the primer and paint will stick. And a lot of this is coming off pretty easily. Now it's time to sand. I've got some 80 grit here. This is really rough. And look at all that gray dust falling off. That is corroded aluminum, which paint will not bond well to. If this metal is clean and just need a polish, I can start with the 220 I showed you earlier. But first, I have to get down to clean metal. And when a wheel is this bad, 80 grit is the fastest way to get to clean metal. Any paint that still sticks to the surface after this is well bonded. So I'm just scuffing it up with the 80, and that'll help the new paint fight to the existing paint. If this looks like a lot of work, it is. But the good news is the 80 grit is very aggressive, so it works pretty quickly. If you had a power sander, you could use it for some of the larger areas, but the contour on the back side of a wheel usually ends up needing to be sanded by hand to get into all the recessed and tight areas. So that's what you get from about 5 minutes with the 80 grit. For this very outer edge of the lip, I don't want to round it off with my finger. It's easy to wear down that 90-degree edge. So I'll use a block to keep the paper flat against the outer edge. And just make sure to keep the block flat on the edge to keep the 90 degree on the edge of the lip true. Look at these gouges. This is why you go to a reputable tire shop when you have nice wheels. Some tech treated this like an old steel rim. I've also got a lot of corrosion here where the bead of the tire actually seals to the wheel. This needs cleaned up to prevent air leaks. Again, with the 80 grit. Sanding off the rest of this paint. Most of it's already gone. But I'm going to be repainting this area, so I need to start with clean metal for the primer to bond well. This is looking better. I'm going to be repainting this whole outer barrel here, and a lot of this paint is still decent. So I could just scuff it up, and that would usually be a good surface for the new paint to bite to. But you never know if there's going to be any reaction between the two paints. I have no idea what kind of paint they used on this back in the 90s, but it is thick, and I'll be here all day trying to sand through it. Plan B. We're outdoors because this is really nasty stuff. I've got some paint stripper. I'll put a link to this in the description. And I'm just soaking the surface of the paint with this. We'll get these inset areas as well. They make this in gallons as well. They call it aircraft remover. And you can just glob it on with a brush if you don't want to worry about overspray. I'm just gonna get all this. All right, we're back. I let this sit for 20 minutes and hoped this would just spray off. But looks like I've got some scraping to do. This paint's almost kind of rubbery, maybe because it's so thick. Nice clean aluminum underneath it though. Let's try a scraper. All right, back to the toolbox. Wire brush. Now we're getting somewhere. See how it does in here. Wire brush is the way to go. The wire brush works great for removing the old paint, with the exception of some areas that I didn't spray heavy enough with the paint stripper. Some of the original paint was still hanging on. A pressure washer would have taken it off no problem. But remember, I'm not using any special tools or machinery on this. I'm keeping it simple to show what can be done in a home garage. I let the wheel dry overnight, and the next day got to work removing the remaining paint with the wire brush, but mostly the 80 grit sandpaper.
2 hours later.
By this time, I was seriously regretting what I said at the start of this video. You know, about how I was going to restore this wheel without any special machinery or power tools. I had done this exact job by hand before with a set of Civic HX wheels, but those 14 by 5.5 inch wheels were a lot smaller, with a lot less surface area than these 15 by 10s, and they were in better condition to start with. So I used a drill with the wire wheel to speed things up. You can get a corded drill for like 20 bucks. I'll put a link in the description. Trust me, it's well worth the time you'll save. Next, I spent some time block sanding some of the curb rash areas with the 80 grit sandpaper. Next, I gave the wheel a quick bath to remove all the paint chips from the wire wheel and all the aluminum dust that I just sanded off. It's important to get the wheel as clean as possible because the next step is moving on up to 180 grit sandpaper, and I don't want any dirt or contaminants left over from the 80 grit on the surface. Clean my work area off as well. Now that the wheel has been stripped down to bare aluminum, I have all the corrosion and old paint removed. I'm all done with the 80 grit. It's time to move on up to some 180 grit. This is a little less coarse, so it will sand out all the deeper scratches from the 80 grit. By the way, here's the wire brushes I used earlier. This one is for cleaning battery terminals, but it works great for getting into the recessed areas. And then of course, you saw me using some of these little wire wheels on the drill. This was a huge time saver. I'll put a link to all those in the description. Right now, let's get to work with this 180 grit. The process for the 180 grit was exactly the same as the 80 grit. Anywhere I had scratches from the 80 grit, I sanded again with the 180 grit. The idea is to keep sanding with finer and finer paper until the scratches are so small that they can be polished out. Notice I'm not sanding on the area of the wheel that I'll be polishing because I never touched it with the 80 grit. This area was originally polished, so it's already more smooth than the rest of the wheel. All right, here's how it's looking after the 180 grit sandpaper. I didn't bother sanding this area because it was already decent. I did hit the spokes though because they were pretty dull with very slight corrosion. Also, if I get really close, you can see some fine machine lines on the surface, kind of like diamond cut wheels have. They're barely there, only in a few spots, but I need to sand those down flush. Here's an example of a machined wheel. If I get really close, ignore all the corrosion, you can see all the fine lines, almost like a vinyl record. Those need to be sanded out. So I'm all done with all of this now. It's time to wet sand the wheel, and I'm gonna be doing that over this metal tub. Put a milk crate in here so I'm not all hunched over. That's a good working height. I'll start wet sanding with this 320 grit paper because the face of the wheel I'm polishing was polished when new, so it's already pretty smooth. If it was plain cast aluminum, I'd start with 180 and 220. So you saw the wood block for the flat edges. I have these thin rubber blocks and they have a tiny bit of flex, and they're going to be good for these spokes on the face of the wheel where the surface is almost flat but very slightly curved. If I just sand this with my fingers, I'll end up rounding off this hard edge here. And I also have this flexible sanding sponge, and this is going to be good for contouring to this curved edge of the barrel. I'm only going to use half of this sheet of paper at a time. Give it a crease both ways. And wrap this around the sponge like so, and give it a dunk. And it's important to keep the wheel wet. This is just water with a tiny bit of dish soap. And I'll start on the barrel of the wheel with a sanding sponge. See that dark gray water? That's actually aluminum dust mixed with the water. I'm actually removing very fine mounts of aluminum from the surface of the wheel. Every minute, stop and give it a dunk. Wash this off a little and repeat. Let's try this way for better leverage. The first step with this 320 is going to take the longest because there are more imperfections to remove and sand through in the beginning. So it does get faster and more rewarding as I move up into the higher grip paper. Make sure I get this lip all the way in where it meets the spokes. Let's throw some clean water on there. And this looks pretty good. Clean and dull. And even. Here's a close look. A clean, uniform surface is what I'm going for here. And there are still some light spots on here, but those should come out as I keep sanding. A few deep nicks there. Not much I can do to get those out, but they won't be too noticeable when I'm not so close up. All right, looking good. Let's check in with a close-up. Those little spots are barely visible, but that's what it was like before. Some of this is just dirty water, but this is pretty clean aluminum. And over here is not clean enough. Here, we're good. There are some super tiny spots still, but I think those will come out when I'm sanding with the finer grits. Next, I continued wet sanding the barrel of the lip with the 320 grit until it all looked as clean as the close-up area we just saw. Then I set the wheel on its back to get better leverage for wet sanding this bevel as well as the rest of the stepped lip. Now that I have the stepped lip all wet sanded and good, this very outer edge here, the flat one that I used the wood block on earlier, I'm going to wet sand that with the 320, but I'm going to use this flat rubber pad. And again, I'm using a flat block here because my fingers will inadvertently wear down that nice crisp 90-degree edge. And yeah, you can still see remnants of curb rash on this edge. The proper way to fill that is by grinding a V-groove and TIG welding to add aluminum to fill in the void. And then it'll need turned down on a lathe. That's definitely not refinishing by hand. Like I said, I'd stick to in the start of the video. Plus, I don't have a TIG welder or a lathe. Let's take this rubber pad out of here. Just folding the paper over a couple times to make it slightly thicker. And I'm using my fingers on this very outer edge, which normally you wouldn't even see if you have some wide, meaty tires like the ones that were on here. But a 15 by 10 wheel with 5 by 114.3 bolt pattern, those are great specs to run on a lower two-wheel drive Toyota pickup. And they'll look great on there with a small tire with some stretch. And if you're running any kind of stretch, you'll see this outer edge. So I'm including it in the polishing process as well. It really doesn't take much extra effort. Let's clean this off and see how the whole lip's looking. It's kind of looking like a brand new raw wheel at this point, which is good. But look at this. Look in the very corner of that edge there where the face meets the barrel. I see some corrosion in there. I'm bending this around my fingernail and really getting in there with some good pressure. That's looking better already. Now it's time to sand the face of the wheel. And to do that, I'm using a smaller rubber pad and wrapping it up like this. One important thing is to make sure the side of the pad I'm using to press the sandpaper against the wheel is the smooth side without the raised letters. That way I have a flat surface of the sandpaper against the flat surface of the wheel for even sanding. And there's no set amount of time to sand. You can kind of tell by a couple things. The surface will have a little less friction when it's been sanded enough. So the paper will feel like it's sanding smoother. Just a little bit easier. And the sound of the paper will get a tiny bit quieter after the surface is fully sanded. Now those things can also mean that the paper is wearing out. So once in a while, I flip the paper around to a fresh side. All right, I think that was plenty for this spoke. Let's clean it off. I'm up into this edge one more time. Not the very edge with my fingernail like before, but just the outer area of the spoke where it meets the edge. Just because I couldn't get all the way up to this edge with a sanding pad. So I'm just hitting this part with my finger really quick. And that's looking great. Here's how it looks close up. Just to give you an idea how it should look. And look at the spoke next to it. Before sanding, after sanding. That's just some sanding residue, not corrosion. I wet sanded the rest of the wheel with 320 grit paper and gave it a good cleaning. Keeping the water clean is important. And the bottom of the bucket is where all the sanded aluminum settles.
I like to start with fresh water with each new grit of sandpaper. Here's a close-up of how it looks all cleaned up. Sort of a raw, spun aluminum looking finish. But now that the wheel is cleaned up, it's time to paint these insets. They were black from the factory, so I'll repaint them black. This was painted too, but it gets covered by the center cap, so I'm not worried about it. If you wanted to, you could polish the inset areas to look like the spokes. But the black inset area makes a really great contrast in the reflection when the lips are polished. So now it's time for paint. For the wide areas, I have some green masking tape. And for the inset openings, I have this 1/8 inch pinstripe tape because it can flex to follow these curves. A few tips for masking a wheel. 1. Make sure the surface is completely clean and dry so the tape will stick. 2. When applying this thin pinstripe tape, be sure to press it down firmly, even using your fingernail if you can. In a straight line, it bonds to the surface pretty well, but the curves will sometimes cause the tape to want to lift. So make sure those are pressed down well. 3. Take your time and double check because it's a lot easier to add a little more tape now than it is to remove dried overspray later. For the outside, I used some newspaper with the masking tape already applied to one edge and overlapped it onto the 1/8 inch tape. Here's the close-up of my masking job. Right here on the outer corners of the inset, I didn't bother trying to match that sharp curve. So I'll have a little bit of overspray to sand off there. Now it's time for the back. I'm going to be painting all this black, all the way around the barrel, plus the back of the spokes. I don't want to get any paint on the mounting surface here. So I have a piece of cardboard to cover that up. You shouldn't paint this because the paint will compress when torquing the lug nuts, and that's going to affect the torque reading. I'm going to use some Duplicolor self-etching primer, and this is the first step because it's formulated to bond to bare metal. Next, I have their gloss black wheel coating, and then I'm going to follow that with some gloss clear coat for extra protection. With this self-etching primer, the idea is not to go heavy. Don't use it like a top coat and try to cover the surface and make this olive green color. A light coat is all I want. If I still see some of the surface through the primer, that's okay. The last thing I want is a run or a sag. A heavy coat just takes more time to dry. This looks good. I'm also going to be painting this area black, just like it was from the factory. So I need a self-etching primer here too. And then the rest of the barrel. But I'm not painting that very outer lip edge because that's going to get polished. And when you're done, turn the can upside down and spray, and that clears out the nozzle. I like to leave these in the sun so they heat up a little bit. That helps them spray a little better than when they're cold. It's been 15 minutes, nice and dry. Save this for later. Now it's time for some gloss black. The barrel of this wheel is so deep that it's actually a tight fit to get this can in here. Give the can a quick shake after every minute of use. So this is a tough wheel to paint, these insets, because they're so far in, especially these towards the center, because I can't get close enough with the can thanks to this massive lip. But it is working.
I can kind of get a good spray at those inset areas from the backside. The offset on this wheel is, I believe, -44. So that means the mounting flange is 44 millimeters inside from what would be the very center of the barrel. And that's what gives the huge lip on the front of these wheels. So I actually have less barrel in the way of painting these insets if I paint them from the backside. These very tiny corners are going to be tough to cover. But I do all the hard to reach areas first, because when trying to cover those, I'll always get overspray on the easy to reach parts. Like you can see, I pretty much painted the back of the spokes as I was aiming for the inset areas. So these only need a tiny bit more now. And then the inner barrel is the easiest of all this. So I'm painting that last. And last but not least, the outside of the barrel. And again, I'm not making it a point to paint the very edge of that outer lip, because it will be polished. But I'm still going to get some paint on that area, so I'll just have to sand off any of that later. But it's not going to be super heavy, so it should be easy to sand off. My coverage isn't 100% on the first coat, and that's fine. Better to go too light than too heavy and get a run. It's been 10 minutes, but now that I've painted this, if I flip it over, I'm going to mess up this lip I painted because it's not fully cured. So I have an old can of Bondo. Any gallon paint can will work great for this. Then I can set the mounting flange of the wheel on top of that. Time for the second coat of black. I noticed that I'm a little lighter in those tight corners of the inset areas. I mean, that's just a tiny area to get into with any kind of paint, spray can or gun. Actually, these cans have an adjustable spray pattern. I just grabbed this red part and rotated it 90 degrees. Yeah. So now I have a horizontal spray pattern instead of vertical. And I can get right in those tight corners with the can held sideways like this. Maybe powder coating would get up in there. I'm not sure. I've never tried powder coating. And most people can't do that in their garage, which is the whole point of this DIY video. Now for the back. Get that out of the way. And my cardboard mask. First, I'm getting these inset areas from the back just to make sure they're fully covered. That's the part you're going to see when the wheel is on a vehicle, so they get special attention. And they go first because they're the hardest to reach. I'm turning the nozzle back to vertical spray pattern, and that's perfect for the rest of the easy areas. I'm really paying attention to this area here inside the lip. This is where the bead of the tire seals. So I want to make sure it's well painted and there's no thin spots or anything weird with the surface. At the same time, I don't want any runs. The rest of the barrel doesn't really matter as much. It's hidden inside the tire. So I'll save some paint and call it good. I gave that like 20 minutes to dry, grabbed a snack, and now it's time for the third coat of black. Let's turn this nozzle to get the horizontal spray pattern, starting off with the insets and the corners again. You guys know the drill. It's so much easier to reach these areas from the back of the wheel. I'm not even gonna flip it over and try and spray from the front. I just rotated the nozzle back to vertical. Now it's time for the clear coat. I let this dry for about 20 25 minutes. Let's get in here. I'm using the same method I've used this whole time. Hard to reach areas first, then apply any additional paint that I need to on the easy areas. I did go a little heavy on that third coat of black. I gave it a little extra time to dry. The recoat window on this Duplicolor wheel paint is within 1 hour or wait after 7 days. It's an enamel, so they usually have that time frame. And this applies to the black and the gloss clear. Painting this barrel is my favorite part of this. Look at that. I've got the arm of a robot. I'll give this 10 or 20 minutes and spray another coat of clear. Coat 2. I forgot to get this part last time, the bead area. Next, I applied one final wet coat of clear to the insets and back of the wheel. It would be my luck a bird would poop on this, so I brought it back in the garage to dry. And here's a close-up look of how it turned out. Here's a close-up of the inset area. It's on there pretty thick. I'm a little light in that corner, but I'm still happy with how it looks. Now, I'm going to let this cure for 24 hours. When unmasking fresh paint, it's always a good idea to take it slow. Also notice I'm peeling the tape away from the painted edge rather than pulling straight up or toward the edge. I did have some of the paint creep under the pinstriping tape. This is more prone to happen on the inside of a masked curve because the tape is more likely to slightly buckle up there because the same amount of tape is covering less surface area than the edge of the tape facing the outside of the curve. But it's not a big deal because it's all coming off when I wet sand. Here's a close-up of the inset area and where the paint crept under the tape. This is still soft enough where I can actually scrape most of it off with just my fingernail. And over here, I got a little on the barrel where I got sloppy with my tape. Now it's time to sand with the 600 grit. You might be wondering what happened to the 400 grit sanding footage. Me too. Apparently those files got deleted when importing from my phone. Not a huge loss though, because the sanding process is repetitive, except you're using a higher grit each time. So I'll speed through most of this to help keep this video short. Here's how it's looking after the 600 grit. Notice we're starting to see some reflection in the barrel. If you compare that to the earlier grit paper, like 320, you'll see that the scratches aren't as heavy as they were before. And now it's time to move on to the 800 grit. And we're going back into time-lapse mode. Time-lapse was actually a great way to capture this because watch closely and you can see the aluminum becoming more reflective as I'm sanding the barrel. Just as before, I'm using the sanding sponge for the barrel to match its contour. Then for the flat spokes of the wheel, I'm using the stiff rubber pad. I'm also using the rubber pad to get into the very corner edge where the barrel meets the face. Then the wood block for the flat edge of the lip. Followed by a good cleaning. I've got some fresh water, and now we're going to move on up to the 1000 grit. Look at that reflection getting sharper as the deeper scratches from the previous grit get sanded out and replaced with smaller scratches from the finer grit. When you get up into the finer grits, dirt is the absolute enemy. I heard some a second ago. I'm trying to find where it was so you can hear what it sounds like. So it's important to keep the bucket of water clean and change it after each grit. Because at this point in the polishing process, if a piece of dirt gets between the paper and the wheel, oh, there it is. It sounds like scratching a vinyl record. The dirt can get pressed against the aluminum and leave a scratch a lot deeper than the finer scratches from the sandpaper. It's not making the sound anymore, so it must have ran down with the water. But that's why it's important to have that bucket of clean water and dunk the paper in there frequently. As you might have noticed, wet sanding aluminum makes quite the mess. Not only does it stain your fingers for a little bit, but it makes a huge mess wherever you're working. The first time I ever polished wheels was 19 years ago in an apartment with an olive green bathtub. Here's a pic I took after sanding with 400 grit. Notice the tub was already starting to get a little bit messy. And here's another pic after I finished sanding with the 2000 grit. And look at that filthy tub. I set the wheel on the ledge for the pics, but when I was doing the actual sanding, the wheel was sitting in the tub on top of all that filth. The weight of the wheel, plus me leaning on it while sanding, left plenty of scratches and ground a lot of that aluminum dust into the surface of the fiberglass tub. I was never able to get it looking perfectly clean again. But here's how those HX wheels turned out. So I'd say it was worth it. But that's why I'm working outside in the garage over this metal tub. If I used a bathtub now, my wife would not be too happy. I'm still on 1000 grit, but you can see I'm sanding every square inch of the wheel. If I rush, I might not remove all the deeper scratches from the previous grit, so take your time. To give you an idea, this close-up time lapse was just over about 4 minutes. Now I'm hand sanding that very outer curved edge, the one that would only be visible with a stretched tire. And then sanded the flat edge with the wooden block. Another bucket of fresh water, and now I'm on 1200 grit. I bet you're wondering how much time all of this takes. Keep in mind that these wheels were pretty rough. Not only am I polishing the face and lip, but the backside of the wheel was heavily corroded, as well as the outside of the barrel. The area where the tire bead mounts was so corroded that the tires wouldn't hold air. That's what Ohio winters will get you. So with all of the stripping paint and prep work, masking, painting, wet sanding, and polishing, which we didn't even get to yet, I'd estimate that I have about 10 hours into this wheel. I know that seems crazy, but I ended up going through a couple of grits each day and it wasn't too bad. I picked these up for a couple $100 because they were pretty neglected. And I don't know if you've checked the prices on 10-inch wide Eagle Alloy 028 wheels lately, but there are multiple sets listed on eBay for $2,500 and up. So even if I end up having 40 hours into the set of 4, I'm still turning a $200 set of wheels into a $2,000 set of wheels. But after polishing this one by hand, I think I'm going to do the next one with polishing tools to see how much faster it goes, and to get a side-by-side comparison of hand polished versus machine polished. Let me know if that's a video that you would be interested in seeing, and I'll make it happen. By the way, here's a close-up of how I polished that slightly curved area that leads up to the flat face of the outer lip. The paper is wrapped around the sponge, and I'm just pressing down against that curved radius with my thumb. This 1200 grit that I'm using is by Sunmite, and I found that it doesn't last as long as a 3M paper. So I guess you get what you pay for when it comes to sandpaper. But it's not cheap. The good news is that this stuff doesn't have a shelf life. So if you ever see any on clearance or being discontinued, snatch it up. Some of this lower grit 3M paper I have is ancient. If you can't find it locally, I'll have links to everything I've used in the description. I didn't bother recording the 1500 grit sanding because it's just more of the same. But this is the final 2000 grit paper here. By this point, I'm so tired of sanding. But look at the crisp reflection of the spokes and that nice fat lip. That's motivation to keep going. So for this wheel, I've probably sanded with each grit for about 10 minutes per grit, maybe a little more. The 320 was a little longer because I was removing the deeper scratches from the 180 grit. And I'm taking my time here with the 2000 grit because the next step is hand polishing. And I want to be sure that only the finest scratches from the 2000 grit are all I'll be trying to polish out. So it's easy to want to rush toward the end, but the finer grits are actually a crucial step. Notice I'm often sanding in the same direction here on this lip. You don't have to sand in the same direction every time, and if you're a beginner at this, it might actually be a good idea to sand in the opposite direction with each grit. That way, you'll be able to see any deeper leftover scratches from the previous grit going in the opposite orientation of the way you're sanding with the lighter current grit. And that will let you know you still got more sanding to do. My rule is when I think I'm about done sanding with a certain grit, sand for a few more minutes to be safe, just to make sure I'm good. Probably why this is taking forever. Flip this around to a fresh side of paper here. Eventually the paper will lose its effectiveness at cutting the aluminum, and you won't get far sanding with dull paper. The finer grit paper seems to wear out a little faster than the more coarse stuff I was using early on. As far as pressure goes, I'm pressing down a little bit, probably the same as if I were sanding a piece of wood. If you're here because of the previous video where I tried these wheels on my shop truck build, the 1980 Rat Rod Toyota, I'm sorry to say that these aren't the wheels I ended up picking for the truck. I picked these for this restoration video because they were in horrible condition. They'll make for a great before and after comparison. And they had painted insets, which I also wanted to include in the video. I literally have a wall of wheels to restore, so this won't be the last wheel restoration video you'll see. And finally, I was finished wet sanding. I gave the wheel an extra thorough cleaning and let it dry. Here's how it looks. Like a dull aluminum wheel. Well, except now the surface has been smoothed to 2000 grit. Here's a look at that very outer edge of the lip that I left bare and wet sanded. And then all this you won't even see when the wheel is mounted. Now, let's get polishing. The wheel is all dry. I want to make sure there's no dust or debris on the surface. I'm using some Mother's Mag and aluminum polish. And here is the before. Document this right here. There's very little reflection. I'll be able to read this label and the reflection when I'm done. I have the wheel standing vertically now because I'm going to be using a lot of pressure, pressing on this lip when I'm polishing. When I polish the spokes, I'll lay it back down flat. I bought this a long time ago, but I still have plenty left. I did have to give it a good shake first. Grab a terry cloth or an old rag. It should have fuzzies on it like this. Don't use nice bath towels for this, or my wife might change the locks on the house. Get a little bit on there, and make sure it's clean so you're not grinding any dirt into the surface, making more scratches. Wipe it on, and just press down and move the towel around. Do circles, back and forth, up and down. And this dark haze is actually aluminum being removed. This is what you want to see. And that's why you use an old towel. It's starting to get kind of dry, so that means time to wipe it off. So turn to a clean spot on the towel. Actually, I should have a whole different towel for wiping off. So I'm supposed to wipe it off before it dries. But look at that. And this is just the first pass. Yeah, look at that. Time for another pass on this spot. One makes a huge difference, but it's the second one that's going to bring out even more shine. And wax off. Now rotate this to the next section on the milk crate and repeat. Next, I put the wheel back down flat to polish the face. And here's how it looks after 2 rounds of mothers. I might do another round or 2, but I can't forget about the center cap. Yeah, that looks terrible. Time to restore this. And I don't know why these stickers look like 10 grit sandpaper, but they've got to go. Next, I gave the center cap a good scrub to remove any dirt, and got to work with the 320 grit sandpaper. These caps were a little more challenging with all the different contours and edges. Here's how it's looking so far. Looks like clean, raw aluminum, which is exactly how the wheel started off. Now I can go through the grits. 400, 600, 800, 1000. Notice I'm using the stiff rubber pad on every surface with an edge. My fingers are soft and rounded, so I can actually round off those crisp edges if I don't use a sanding block. 1200, 1500, and finally 2000 grit. And now it was time for the mother's polish to work its magic. And here's how it looks. I like how these stickers were a little larger, so they actually filled the whole opening on the center cap.
Consider subscribing and giving this video a thumbs up if you found it helpful. That really helps the channel grow. And if you're interested in seeing a tutorial on how to paint your wheels, I've refinished these in a previous video that I'll link down in the description. Thanks for watching.